If you were a child in the late 90s and 2000s and grew up with cable or satellite, you probably remember a channel called Noggin. Not to be confused with Nick Jr., Noggin, for the majority of its lifespan, was a preschool channel that in its prime aired original programming, such as Jack's Big Music Show, Ooby, and The Upside Down Show, as well as shows from Nick Jr. or other companies such as Franklin, Little Bear, Dora the Explorer, and Blue's Clues. Noggin launched in 1999 as a preteen blog, until a few years later becoming the preschool channel that we know it for, and splitting its preteen and teenage content into a separate blog on the channel called The N. In its lifespan as a TV channel, Noggin has had 3 hosts, all being characters that had segments during commercial breaks, many of them talking directly to the viewer. One of the most notable things about Noggin was Moose and Zee. Moose and Zee were a yellow moose and a bluebird duo that were hosts of the channel from 2003, and remained hosts even after Noggin becoming Nick Jr. in 2009. During commercial breaks, they would sing their own original songs, play games with the viewer, and talk about programming that was coming up next. Moose, voiced by Paul Christie, who had previously voiced Stick Stickly on Nickelodeon in the 90s, acted as a teacher, with Zee being his silent companion. Back during this time, Moose and Zee were all the rage with children ages 2 to 7 years old. They even had their own merchandise, a live event that featured other Nick Jr. and Noggin characters, and hosted Nickelodeon Fit, a Nickelodeon-themed fitness game for the Wii. But on February 29, 2012, parents and children turned on their TVs to find out that their beloved hosts, without any warning, mysteriously vanished. Angrily, parents made petitions and stormed Nick Jr.'s social media, demanding to know why the duo was gone and to bring them back. Eventually, in 2015, with the launch of the Noggin app, Moose and Zee were reintroduced as hosts, but only on the app, which costed a certain amount of money each month, and would only appear occasionally on Nick Jr.'s TV channel, only to advertise the app. But even being host for the app was short-lived, as just 4 short years later, they were reduced to only a single folder on the app and nothing more. Today, merchandise of Moose and Zee is very rare to find, and when something does pop up on eBay or a secondhand website, it can get pricey and go quickly. According to Lost Media Archive and Lost Media Wiki, there are several forms of lost media of Moose and Zee, not just on-air segments, but segments from the Noggin and Nick Jr. website and on-demand service. So, if during their time they were so popular, how did this happen? How did this pair go from mobs of parents begging the channel to bring them back, to falling into almost complete obscurity? And what was so great about them in the first place? Moose and Zee were created by Terry Weiss to be somewhat of a teacher. The majority of Moose and Zee's segments were teaching preschoolers about concepts new to them, such as shapes, seasons, weather, adding, and subtracting. Although there were other educational channels with hosts like this, there was no host that was as educational and in-depth as Moose and Zee, while also being fun and entertaining to the viewer. Moose and Zee had created a formula that had just worked, making both parents and children obsessed with them. By the time Moose and Zee were removed, it was 2012, which was a really pivotal time for consumerism, especially advertising. Noggin, even when becoming Nick Jr., was also well advertised for not having commercials, and what would have been a commercial break consisted of Moose and Zee segments and advertising for Noggin and Nick Jr. properties. When Moose and Zee were removed from the channel, Nick Jr. also started to air actual commercials. Nick Jr., as well as other educational channels, progressively became more about keeping a child's attention, rather than teaching them new skills and information like they were originally created to do. Children's entertainment in general became more about distracting the child, much like shows such as CoComelon do today, which many studies have shown is not healthy for a child and can give behavioral problems, attention problems, and even anger issues, due to the overstimulation that these shows rely on to distract kids. A lot of networks and big companies, at least since the early to mid-2010s, have been more focused on advertisers than their audience, which gave way to the decline of cable and the rise of streaming services. Due to the neglect of the audience, on-air channels dropped in quality, which frustrated a lot of viewers. Streaming services, at least at the time, were cheaper than cable, and allowed viewers to watch shows that weren't on the air anymore. More and more people opted for this, rather than paying a lot for channels that were now subpar at best, and this directly affected Moose and Zee eventually falling into obscurity. Parents that fought so hard to bring them back, only for the network to only slap them on an app for a couple of years and call it a day, became jaded, and eventually, because they weren't being heard or cared about, they gave up. And with the network also not caring about the duo, many of their segments became lost media. And as time went on, Moose and Zee eventually fell into obscurity. Moose and Zee were very important back in the day, and still are, and don't really get credit for it. It is sad to see these two hosts that were once so popular fall into obscurity. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and if you want to see my future content, subscribe and like this video. Thank you for watching.